I will start the countdown and then make the slide. Yep. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast again this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator.
Welcome to the broadcast this evening, sir.
What do you're always teasing me? This looks more like a Vatican room than our usual room where we transmit. This looks less professorial, now more like a cardinal. So why are you now?
but
I'll keep quiet.
But sir, in one of the sessions, someone moved you up from prophet to apostle. So maybe this is the apostle look.
Okay. I accept.
Or the look of a pope, the first African pope.
Oh no. They don't forget all this white influenced historical documents, actually we have had African popes. If you look at the first 5 popes, I've read somewhere that 2 of them were African popes.
Okay. That is good. Well, a good start to the program. Thank you for being here, and thank you to our viewers who I can see on YouTube here. As usual, please do not forget to share the link and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Well, sir, this evening, let me start with, again, we'll start with Russia. So many new developments there. And then we move on to some interesting topics that I think we would want to throw to you this evening, Sam, that our viewers would also be keen to listen to. And I want to start with this point about Ukraine, sir. Russia has now released a statement to say that they were scaling back, they've achieved their initial initiative, and now they want to focus on some regions. Some people take that to mean Russia has effectively considered defeat in taking their original objective to its end. What do you feel about that? Are we seeing the defeat of Russia in modern times now?
Oh, no. I think one of the maxims which we have tried to impress on our viewers on this program is that in war, there are always several victims. And one of the victims is the truth, the absolute truth, nothing but the truth. I know they use that in a court of law, but also in times of war, you play games with the psychology of your opponent. You try to mislead them. Maybe they will fall into the trap. You try to misinform them about your intentions. And I'm afraid Russia doesn't have good credibility when it comes to diplomacy. Obviously, all countries in the world do lie when it comes to projecting their interests internationally. So I did not for one moment believe the Kremlin when they said that. They might have been hoping that the Ukrainians, especially the forces around their capitals and major cities, will let down their guard. That could be one. The second could be trying to prepare their own home crowd with bad news, but put as victory. We succeeded in what we wanted to do during the first phase. Therefore, we will move on to the second phase. Whereas, as you rightly pointed out in your intro, actually it could mean, look, we didn't succeed with that first phase. So let's look for some way of claiming that defeat is victory while we concentrate on the other ones. Nobody really knows. But what we've known in the past 24 hours is that the shelling of those cities with massive artillery has not stopped. So to that extent, I think we were right not to be misled by the mis or disinformation that came out of the Kremlin.
So one point that has not necessarily taken the world by surprise is this issue of the oligarchs and how the oligarchs have become a key topic in this war in terms of the sanctions from Western states on Russian oligarchs. Sir, the question is this. What is your view on the position of oligarchs and the impact of these people on the economy? Because they seem to be controlling billions and billions of pounds. What is your take on that, sir?
Look, in this war, Russia is wrong. Let us admit that. And all weapons that could be possibly fashioned on the international scene to demoralize and demonize Russia, I think the global north is entitled to use them. However, oligarchs is not a Russian phenomenon. Actually, the concept of oligarchs is a global phenomenon. Do you recall there was one prime minister in Britain who talked about a major country in the global south as being fantastically corrupt? And people expected that the president of that country, who was going to attend a conference in London, will either walk away or get involved in an exchange of words with the British Prime Minister. But when reporters asked him, he said, money stolen from my country are domiciled in Great Britain. So just return my money to me, to my country, which means that, number one, there are oligarchs in the global south as well who embezzle money, run their country to the ground economically, and take this money to the global north. Number two, recall that if I think 2 days ago or so, President Biden, I think, came out with a statement about, or a plan of taxation of the rich in America who do not pay taxes. Now, how do these people become rich? I mean, apart from, again, taking the assets of the global south, they're also taking the assets of the United States itself. They were also exploiting the American poor. There are oligarchs in the United States also. And wouldn't you regard Trump as an oligarch who just came from nowhere? And we still cannot trace, I mean, he's fighting battles in the courts to block access to information about his wealth. Is he not an oligarch? So oligarchs defined as that handful of people who use their access to politicians in order to rip off their country is a global phenomenon. So to that extent, we need to have a global solution to it. I really don't think that cleaning the global economy should be seen as a punishment targeting Russia alone. We shouldn't. This is the opportunity for actually all countries in the world to get together and have the convention against oligarchy. Because it's one thing to steal. If you have nowhere to take that money, you may not be successful in the theft. But both the thieves, the oligarchs, and countries that give them sanctuary or give their wealth sanctuary are equally guilty of the rip-off of the global poor. Let's put it that way.
But sir, someone may ask the question that where do you draw the line between the oligarchs and people who are legitimate billionaires who run their businesses and were able to grow their businesses and who feel that they want to maybe donate to a political party under the laws? Because I think the United States allows that for people to donate. Where do you draw the line between the people who do that, who maybe they were private sector billionaires, made their money that way, and maybe didn't necessarily have any sort of inroads into politicians? Where do you draw the line, sir?
Let me ask you the question then. Why is it legitimate for a man who is brilliant enough to have access to the loopholes in the law to become a billionaire by not paying taxes, by exploiting that loophole, but the little owner or the owner of the shop, the corner shop, has, under the watchful eye of the internal revenue system, pay his own tax annually? Why is that dichotomy legitimate? I said somewhere about 3 years ago, I said, in my own country, there are no billionaires who are not corrupt. And of course, the Nigerian oligarchs came after me. And there was this particular person who got up, because it was a public lecture, and said, I am a billionaire, but I have never been corrupt in my life. So, Prof, you owe me an apology. And I said, we better talk privately so we don't turn this into a one-on-one battle. Because I was aware that this fellow, who was and is still a car dealer, will submit a quotation to government to bring in German models of the vehicles he's selling. But when he submits, and at German prices, but when he brings in the vehicles are from another country where the prices ought to be lower. And that's what he did, and that's what he still does, and that's how he made this fantastic money. But I wasn't going to, as I said, get into a one-on-one with him publicly. So to that extent, I will now repeat the same thing, that in the world, there is no billionaire that is not corrupt, in the sense that he has manipulated the loopholes in the law to amass that wealth and avoid paying taxes on it. So that's really where I will draw the line. You say governments are complicit on this issue, simply because, and it was even implied in your question, that after all, the law allows millionaires to make donations to political parties. Well, they then protect their interests once the party gets into power. That's why they donate money to these political parties, so that they can protect their interests. And I don't want to turn this into a lecture on oligopoly, the control of the economy by the very few who are rich to the detriment of the many who are poor. But the fact is, it is the rich who control policies of government. Because if not so, why? When the law is so clear that receiver of stolen goods is committing a crime, they must have put exceptions there to allow countries to keep money of the oligarchs until it then becomes a political issue. So that to me, I have no problem with justifying my position.
Thank you for that, sir. I think those are really interesting views, and maybe we should play that to some of the billionaires and get them to respond to it, sir, and see what their take would be on that view, sir. And
I better get a good lawyer to defend me. Oh, yes.
And to our viewers, please put your comments on there if you want specific contributions to that point, because I think it's a very important point that's going to stay with us for a while as that starts to evolve over the coming weeks. But sir, let's go to the United States. And one of the questions that someone wanted you to talk about is the fact that for some months now, we've been hearing about the nuclear agreement. The US was almost at the point of concluding that agreement with Iran. But now again, we've now seen the United States now impose even more sanctions on Iran and on that their program. Isn't that going to aggravate an already tense situation?
Well, I thought I knew a thing or two about diplomacy. And one of the tenets of diplomacy is like fighting war. Actually, diplomacy is war by other means. You don't make more enemies than you can cope with. To me, why continue to use these sanctions against friend and foe? If eventually either Europe turns off its importation of oil and gas from Russia, or Russia turns the thing off, you are going to need countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, to turn on their oil and gas supplies, especially to Europe. That is then not the time to in fact, the extra sanctions which Trump imposed on Iran unjustifiably when he walked away from the nuclear pact. This is actually the time to, as a gesture of good faith, withdraw what I would call the Trumpian sanctions, but not to now, in the middle of a major global crisis that we cannot see the end of it, impose more sanctions on Iran that you may actually need further down the road. I find that kind of diplomacy a bit difficult to understand. I wouldn't, if I was still a practicing diplomat, I would have advised my government or any government to go down the route of making more and more enemies. I wouldn't.
While we're still on the United States, we're seeing something rather historic taking place. And that is the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. And one of the things that President Biden has said is that it's about time that government starts to look like the America that we know today in terms of the diversity angle. What are your views on what is happening with this nomination? And how do you think that will impact the psyche of the American nation and the world at large with that nomination, sir?
Well, I do congratulate President Biden for fulfilling another of his campaign promise. He did promise that if there were going to be a vacancy, he would consider a Black American woman, an African American woman, or I don't know now what is the politically correct terminology, and he's fulfilled that promise. He's picked someone who everybody agrees to be a solid lawyer and a solid judge. She had been presented before the Senate twice before for appointment as a judge. Once a judge of the federal court and then a judge of the Court of Appeal. And on both occasions, she has sailed through. So obviously, she has good credentials. And this is a feather in her achievements. And I do congratulate her also. I watched the proceedings of the hearings, and I have a lot of respect for the way she handled herself. The attack dog of that senator, Ted Cruz, is that not the name? It was classic. And I think the loser in that was that senator and not the judge. But see, unfortunately, that's one of the what I will call the the low attributes of politics at times, that the person with brains, with a long list of achievements, with credentials, has to sit before illiterates to justify herself, just because the Constitution says they must, her nomination must go before them for approval. But she acquitted herself very well. And I also have noticed that at least one of the Republican senators has said she would vote for her, which then means that the approval, final approval by the Senate is no longer in doubt, even though there are one or two spoilers in the Democratic Party, who, for reasons best known to them, seem determined to derail President Biden. But I hope that they will not play the spoilers game on this occasion. But good luck to her. I think she will be an asset to the Supreme Court. And given her age, she has a long time to serve on the bench.
Thank you for that, sir. Let us go to Israel. We've had an interesting development as well, sir, in Israel, and about Israel, I should say. And this is where some foreign ministers, UAE, Morocco, Egypt, and Israel, gathered together for a summit in Egypt. Is there any significance to this? Because now we're starting to see, initially was Abraham's Accord. We saw a little bit of coming together of Israel and the Arab states. And we're starting to see a lot more communication going on between the two of them. Is this the beginning of some kind of peace in that region and between these parties?
Well, I think for number one, for a long time, Israel had been ruled by a right-wing government that basically was anti-Arab. Let's not put too fine a gloss on our words. And this will be the first time that at least a more reasonable government, which even though it's also, when it comes to defense issues, just as, committed as the Netanyahu government to defending Israel. But he was showing some respect towards the Arab countries. And with everybody, even in the Arab world, felt, well, the way things are unscrabbling all over the world, in our own little corner of the Mediterranean, let us see whether talking to each other could lead somewhere. Number three, all of them are very, very wary of Iran and Hezbollah, whom they regard as a sidekick of Iran. and that pursues Iranian policies in that area. And that therefore they have a common enemy that they should try to cage while America is busy with Ukraine. They want to ensure that the Iranians don't take advantage of that and, start any crisis in that part of the world. And I think it's for those three reasons that those four foreign ministers met, just to test the waters. Wasn't expecting any major breakthrough there. They are just testing the waters. And of course, now we have seen the pushback from ISIS, not even the Palestinians as such, but ISIS in terms of the shootings within Israel itself, and with ISIS claiming credit for the violence. And I was listening to the reaction of the West Bank Arabs, not even the Gaza ones, who said, well, we have been suffering all these decades what the Ukrainians are now suffering. And yet, nobody is showing as much concern for us. And this was supposed to be the father of one of the shooters that was involved in the killing of 5 people. It was like he was saying it with pride, even though he knows the Israelis are going to demolish his house, which is against international law, because collective punishment for crimes is not allowed by international law. But that's what Israel has been doing. So he knows his house is going to be demolished, is going to become homeless because something his son has done. So I think we should expect, honestly, all over the world, on regional basis, we should expect to see this testing of the waters to ensure that even though the American and Russian and Chinese attentions are somewhere else, that they don't, because of that, crawl into major crisis in their own area. But don't expect major breakthroughs. Diplomacy doesn't work that way.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to, actually, there's a point someone is raising here from YouTube, sir. This particular one is from YouTube. Agreeing to your comment about oligarchs and the role they play. But this person is, I think, raising a good point, sir, which is when someone gets into power because they've been sponsored by some of these oligarchs with donations and things like that, how easy or difficult is it for them to switch allegiance once they're already in power now and they can do what they need to do?
It is difficult. One could cite several examples, especially if the donation was made to the party. Because if the party then gets into power, the party is committed to the donor. If the donations are to individual MPs, especially given the system practice in the US, where you have organizations political organizations will donate money to specific constituencies to elect senators or elect members of the House of Reps, then you know that if you diverge from the interests, like gun owners in the US, if you divert from their interests, they are then going to sponsor an opposition candidate against you in the next election. And no politician wants to lose elections. So that kind of ties them down to the interests of those, who have contributed financially to their success in the election.
While we're talking about elections, let's go to France. In April, from starting tomorrow, the French people will be going to the polls in this month of April coming to determine if President Macron would be serving a second term as the leader of the country. But some have said that Macron's involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war may have damaged his chances of a second term. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, you've come back online.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. So I would repeat the point. Some are wondering whether President Macron's involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war has damaged his credibility in the country, and therefore he may have lost his chances of re-election. What is your take on that, sir?
I suspect that actually the French will be rather proud of Macron's various interventions. Again, I said once on this platform that since the time of Napoleon Bonaparte, the French have often thought of themselves as the major player in Europe. Never mind that Napoleon was finally defeated by a combination of European forces. But every French president have felt that he was a mini Napoleon, and the French people have this, pride. I won't call it arrogance. Maybe each French person sees himself as a mini Napoleon. So I suspect that they would actually have been proud that they again batted, above the, to use a cricket term. So I don't think his intervention, various diplomatic intervention, even against the background of the disrespect that Putin showed him in that I was going to say face-to-face meeting, I think they would rather be proud that he's still, batting in the innings, and that is still one of those that Putin calls, and one of those that Putin takes his call when you see, he hasn't. I know that there's some suspicion that there is some game he may be playing that may be detrimental to the unity of the EU and NATO. But that just remains suspicion. It hasn't manifested itself. So I think that for this oncoming election, Macron, they actually have a lot of credits, to his political ambition.
So let's go to Hungary and Ukraine. There is an interesting debate going on now, sir. And this is where Hungary's foreign minister has accused Ukraine of interfering in the elections coming up on the 3rd of April. Now, if this were true, and there's a video of the foreign minister saying this, so we know he did say this. But if this were true, that Ukraine was indeed interfering in the election in Hungary, number one, are you surprised that despite the war, they still have the opportunity to do that sort of thing? And number two, what is significant about Hungary that would want to make Poland concerned about the outcome of the elections there?
It depends on your definition of intervention. What I understand has been going on is this. Hungary has actually stepped out of the EU and NATO package of sanctions against Putin. Before even the war started, Hungary was one of the few European countries that was pro-Putin and has refused to supply anything to Ukraine. So their lack of consensus goes back ways. What I understand has happened is that there have been calls between the president of Ukraine and the opposition leader in Hungary, wishing him good luck. I mean, Ukraine is in no position to help anybody, whether by donation or financial, electoral support or anything. It's not in a position to do that. So this kind of hostile relationship long existed, but it has not affected the receptivity of the Ukrainian refugees who have been flowing into Hungary. Hungary has not shut its door to them. The government may not be offering helping hands, but the average Ukrainians have been wonderfully kind and supportive of the Ukrainian refugees. This is my understanding. So the spat between the two, it's for electoral gains. The government makes that kind of statement. It goes down well with its own supporters, who may then hope that they will whip up nationalistic sentiments that may sway some of the voters of the opposition onto their side. That look, we are the one keeping Hungary out of this mess. And if it goes beyond this, it's better you return us to power so that we can continue to keep Hungary away from the target of whatever it is that Putin has in mind.
Thank you, sir. I want to take one question from Africa, and then I'll take another one, and we end the program for tonight, given the time we've got left. Very quickly, in Tunisia, last summer, we saw the President Said, who suspended the constitution and decided that he was going to rule the government in what some have referred to as a one-man rule. But now, for the first time, about 120 members of parliament have now come together to hold an online meeting to effectively challenge the president. How effective is that method, and are they going to really get much done by doing that sort of thing, sir?
I think the power is in the hands of the armed forces. As long as the armed forces support the president, we're meeting online, passing online, and even though it will resonate with their supporters, but the president seemed to, with the assistance of the armed forces, seem to have kept the street quiet. There have been demonstrations from time to time, but nothing that has proved a threat to the president. And I don't expect that just meeting online, which, as I said, would encourage their supporters to perhaps still try their luck on the street, but the power lies in the hands of the army, depending on which way they switch. If the army decides to switch to the side of the parliament online, to use that term, then the president is gone. But if the army decides to stay with the president, which it has done up to now, then whether they meet online or they meet, secretly, or they meet, will make no difference.
Thank you for that, sir. And my last question, and I hope that it won't be my last question on this program, but sir, we saw some unusual circumstances at the just concluded Oscars. And some people have referred to it as Slapgate. And I've also started to see some people talk about the rise of Slapgate. But sir, what is your view?
Well, I'm not a violent person, and I don't believe in violence. People who say that are often hypocrites. Because if we don't believe in violence, then we should abolish all armies. I believe there is a red line that should be drawn on everything and anything in life. We already have some of the red lines. You don't trivialize child pornography. You don't trivialize human trafficking. You don't trivialize LGTB. So we already have red lines. Why should we not have a red line about making fun of somebody, anybody's medical condition? Anybody's medical condition. Why should that be allowed? I've known families who have had to battle cancer in those families, some even losing family members. Why should that be a source of fun to a comedian? And you then tell me that, well, you should just have the target should just have taken it on the chin. While the comedian can walk away with the dollars he's paid for having just made fun of the chemical misery and agony of another human being. Well, I would have done what Will Smith did. I would have decked him. Actually, maybe that slap wasn't really strong enough. I would have decked him. My wife is sitting next to me. I know the pain and suffering that she goes through. It's not as if having a bald head is a fashion statement by her. It is a medical condition. And I will allow somebody to then stand up there and make fun of her. Excuse me. The comedian crossed the red line and he got what he deserved. I think that the United States culture needs to be careful about not having values that must not be trampled upon. I've heard the people who are defending the comedians. Some of them are comedians themselves. Some of them are not. That's their right. But Smith did the honorable thing, and there was no need for him to apologize. But then I know that if the film companies come after you for doing something which they now feel is not politically correct, that could be the end of your career. So he is now walking back from what he did. I think he did the right thing. I think he did the honorable thing. And he has my support. It's not a question of being a violent man. There are red lines that you don't cross.
So, on that note, I end the program for this evening. I hope I'll be able to come back next week, sir, after.
I hope I will be able to come back.
I just thought to throw that one in there just because it's making the rounds. It's not foreign policy, but but now I know what to do and to stand clear if something is happening. But thank you very much, sir. And thank you to our viewers for being there. Much appreciated as usual for always joining. And those of you that have joined despite the time change, thank you for being there. We'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.